March 17, 1945, 1400 hours. Somewhere on the icy plains near Remagen, Germany. The Rhine winds like a steel serpent under a grey, bruised sky. Rain seeps into the earth, turning tracks to mud, uniforms to rags. The distant rumble of artillery trembles through the bones of the hills, a deep, unending growl of a continent at war. In the din, a U.S. cavalry reconnaissance patrol crests a ridge, their jeeps crawling forward like cautious predators. Engines sputter, radios hiss, and from the fog they see her, a lone figure stumbling through the ruins of a farmyard. A woman, a German prisoner of war, her face is caked with ash and fear. Her uniform, once proud Wehrmacht grey, now hangs in tatters. Thigh Sergeant, Texan by his drawl and his dust-covered hat, swings off his horse. The patrol halts. Rifles lift, then lower. The world seems to pause. He walks toward her, slow, measured, every eye watching. The wind whips the mud between them like a curtain about to rise on an unthinkable act. And then, in a single silent motion, the cowboy extends a gloved hand and lifts the German woman onto his horse. The men around him freeze. No one speaks. No one breathes. For a moment, the front stops moving. The sound of war recedes, leaving only the creak of saddle leather and the rasp of her breath. An act of quiet humanity, or quiet defiance, in a place where both had long been forgotten. U.S. 9th Armored Recon Log, March 17, 1945. The American trooper's name would not survive in official records. Neither would hers. But that brief instant, the cowboy lifting his enemy, would spread through the camp like a whispered legend. Soldiers spoke of it over mess tins and under floodlights, each retelling sharpening the image. A man of the West, born among cattle and dust, facing the ruins of Europe, and choosing mercy over vengeance. Field Journal, 14th Cavalry Group, 1945. The setting was no ordinary battlefield. In March 1945, the Western Front was collapsing like a burned-out bridge. Hitler's armies were fractured, retreating west toward the Rhine, their last great barrier. To the east, the Red Army had already clawed its way into the Oder. To the west, the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies pressed hard, closing the trap. Yet even in victory, the Americans found themselves in chaos. Bridges mined, refugees flooding the roads, entire German towns surrendering without orders. U.S. Army After Action Report, March 1945. It was here, amid that collapse, that units like the 9th Armored Division and the 14th Cavalry Group operated, fast, lean, born of mobility. These were men who had traded spurs for steel, horses for half-tracks, and yet carried in their blood the same restless frontier instinct. Their mission was to probe the unknown, to test crossings, to scout bridges. Their success had led to one of the war's last miracles, the capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7th, just 10 days earlier. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, 1945. When that bridge fell into American hands intact, chaos erupted in the German command. Hitler raged, sacked officers, and ordered the execution of those who failed to destroy it. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Allied troops poured across the Rhine. The war's end was visible, but its violence was far from over. German resistance stiffened, driven by desperation and fear of Soviet retribution. Among the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe remnants were thousands of women, nurses, auxiliary personnel, and in some rare cases, combatants pressed into service. Bundesarchiv, Frauenhilfsdienst Records, 1945. In one of those chaotic post-Remagen patrols, American cavalry units swept through villages still burning from artillery fire. It was during one of these missions, some said near Linz am Rhein, others near Bad Hönningen, that the encounter occurred. The cowboy sergeant, likely part of a forward screening element, found the German woman and an auxiliary attached to a flak battery abandoned during the retreat. She had lost her transport, her weapon, her comrades, and as American reconnaissance vehicles appeared on the horizon, she raised her hands and awaited her fate. Captured Personnel Interrogation Report number 4723, 1945. But instead of brutality, came an act of impossible gentleness. The cowboy, still in the saddle, extended a calloused hand and wordlessly pulled her up. For a moment, history folded in on itself. The frontier horseman and the European soldier, two worlds colliding in a gesture that defied the logic of total war. Witnesses later claimed the entire patrol halted, staring in disbelief. One radio operator muttered into his handset, "You're not going to believe this." Signal Corps transmission log. 45 when they reached the prisoner collection point. The guards there refused to take her until the necessary paperwork was processed. So the cowboy stayed mounted. The woman perched behind him, both drenched in cold rain, both silent. By dusk, as artillery echoed far away, the camp guards relented. The cowboy dismounted, helped her down, carefully, respectfully, and saluted his commanding officer before riding back into the fog. Combat Command B Journal, March 17, 1945. The story spread quickly. In a war where cruelty had become currency, such an act felt almost subversive. Soldiers whispered about the cowboy who made the camp stop breathing. Some saw it as gallantry, others as madness. To the Germans, word of the event filtered through captured prisoners. An American horseman who treated a German woman like a lady. Wehrmacht interrogation summary. April 1945. To historians, the tale stands at a crossroads of two identities. The American myth of the cowboy, independence, mercy, individual conscience, and the industrialized slaughter of modern warfare. The U.S. Army of 1945 was the most mechanized force in human history, yet within it rode men who still measured honor by how they treated the defeated. U.S. Army Psychological Operations Review 1946. As night fell over the Rhine Valley that March evening, the sounds of war returned. Mortars, engines, shouts in the dark. But among the men of that patrol, silence lingered. They had witnessed something rare, a moment of grace in the wreckage of empire. The cowboy rode ahead, the silhouette of his hat dissolving into the rain. Behind him, the German woman was led toward the POW enclosure, clutching a wool blanket given by one of the medics. The camp, for a heartbeat, had forgotten to breathe. No medals would mark the act. No unit citation would name the man. But in a war that had reduced mercy to myth, a nameless cowboy had reminded them all that humanity could still exist, even here, at the gates of the Third Reich's ruin. And yet, behind that single act lay a deeper truth, one hidden in the machinery of the American advance, in the unseen structure that made moments like this even possible. For while one man offered kindness, an entire army's unseen network was reshaping the final months of the war. Its radios, its mobility, its uncanny ability to move and communicate faster than the enemy could comprehend. What the Germans didn't know, that what they couldn't yet understand, was that America's cavalry had evolved beyond horses and heroism. They had learned to harness something far more powerful. Information itself, and that secret, that invisible advantage, would decide the battles still to come. Understand what gave that lone cowboy and his, comrades their uncanny reach and their ability to appear out of fog and vanish into mist. One must step inside the unseen architecture of the late war American army. Beneath the noise of engines and the rattle of 50-caliber guns pulsed something more vital than muscle or metal, a nervous system of steel wires and humming frequencies. The cavalry of 1945 no longer rode by instinct alone. They were guided by signals, radios, and a logistics network so vast that even German intelligence officers could not comprehend how it functioned. U.S. Army Signal Corps Field Report, March 1945. At the heart of that transformation stood the SCR-300, the world's first truly portable FM backpack radio. Weighing just 35 pounds, it gave platoon leaders a voice across miles of shifting battlefield. Developed by Galvin Manufacturing, the company that would soon rename itself Motorola, the SCR-300 changed warfare as profoundly as the tank or the airplane. Technical Manual TM 11242, 1943. Before its arrival, soldiers depended on AM transmitters, whose signals bent and fractured in rough terrain. But frequency modulation, pioneered by engineer Daniel E. Noble and refined by Henry Magnuski, offered clarity through chaos. Even under artillery bursts, the FM sets hummed with perfect tone, unaffected by lightning or interference. An infantryman could speak to armor support, artillery observers, and air cover without fear of static or delay. Motorola Engineering Memo, 1944. For men like the cowboy sergeant, this invisible thread of communication meant life. Out in the void between armored columns, the cavalry scouts were the eyes of the army. Each jeep bristled with antennas, its crew trained not only to shoot but to listen, to scan frequencies, to relay sightings, to call for airstrikes with the precision of a sniper. In the frozen plains near Remagen, this made them ghosts, striking then fading before the enemy could answer. 9th Armored Reconnaissance Squadron Log, March 1945. The Germans noticed it first as confusion. Reports flooded Wehrmacht headquarters describing phantom patrols appearing from impossible directions, slipping between strong points before dawn. One officer wrote, "The Americans fight as if guided by a single mind. We attack one flank, and they answer from the other before our message even arrives." Wehrmacht After Action Summary, March 1945. That single mind was not magic. It was radio. Every American company in the 9th Armored Division carried multiple SCR-300s, supported by vehicle-mounted SCR-508s, linked back through battalion networks. Engineers at Signal Corps depots in Liège and Verdun worked around the clock, repairing tubes, recalibrating dials, and training replacement operators. The system was so reliable that by late March, forward cavalry screens could coordinate artillery fire within 90 seconds, faster than any army in history. Signal Center Quarterly Review, 1945. It was this unseen synchronization that shaped one of the war's final confrontations, the Battle of the Ruhr Pocket. Beginning March 25, 1945, Allied forces encircled nearly 350,000 German troops, trapped between the Ruhr and the Sieg. Terrain was broken and forested, weather bitterly cold. But the Americans advanced like clockwork, battalions shifting, converging, communicating across invisible currents of FM waves. U.S. Army Operations Summary, April 1945. At dawn on April 1st, near the town of Ludenscheid, the 14th Cavalry Group received orders to probe a valley suspected of harboring retreating Volkssturm units. The Cowboys Regiment was part of that sweep, not by horse now, but by M8 armored cars and M24 Chaffee light tanks. The convoy rolled through mist and pine, engines muted, radios whispering code words: Thunderbolt, High Noon, Yellow Sun, Field Signal Order. April 1st, 1945. When the first shots came, machine gun bursts from a hillside barn, the lead scout called it in instantly. Within moments, artillery from the 90th Division answered, their fire guided by coordinates relayed through 3 FM hops. In less than 5 minutes, the position was neutralized. A prisoner later recalled hearing, "American fire before our own radio operator could report our contact." Interrogation Report, number 4811. April 1945. Speed and precision. Those were the twin weapons of this new cavalry. Where once scouts rode by intuition, now they moved by waveform. Engineers back home at the Fort Monmouth Signal Laboratory had designed tuning coils capable of maintaining frequency stability even after rough handling. The tubes could survive cold down to 30 degrees C. That meant radio still worked on alpine passes or in frozen forests, places the Germans assumed would silence pursuit. Signal Corps Technical Bulletin 4114, 1944. Inside each command jeep, an operator hunched over a glowing dial, headphones pressed tight. Static gave way to voices, calm, clipped, professional. Eagle to Dusty, move on grid 44, confirm target smoke. Artillery firing, danger close, then silence, then thunder. Combat radio transcript, April 1945. Even the Luftwaffe noticed the effect. Reconnaissance flights reported Allied convoys that dispersed and reformed with unnatural precision. German signal intercepts could not jam the FM bands effectively. Their own equipment was tuned to older AM systems. The Reich's electronic warfare units, designed for 1939's static front lines, found themselves deaf against 1945's moving frequencies. OKW Signals Directorate Memo, 1945. This unseen mastery extended beyond combat. Logistics convoys carrying fuel and rations followed directions relayed in real time. When bridges collapsed under retreating Germans, American engineers were already en route with Bailey Bridge components before command orders reached higher headquarters. Every truck, every half-track, every horse-drawn cart that crossed the Rhine owed its precision to invisible voices. Army Transportation Corps Dispatch, March 1945. The men who made it possible seldom wore medals. In Chicago and Peoria, factory workers, many of them women, wound copper wire by hand, thousands of turns per coil, sealing them with lacquer and hope. Each spool shipped in crates stamped SCR 300, handle carefully. In Detroit, the same assembly lines that once built radios for civilian cars now produced instruments of survival. Motorola production records 1944. Engineers like Henry Magnuski often said they built the heartbeat of the army. Without them, cavalry patrols would have been blind and deaf. With them, even a cowboy on a horse could move as part of a synchronized war machine. One heartbeat among thousands, pulsing through static and mud. Signal Course Design Interview 1946. By April 13th, the Ruhr pocket collapsed. Over 325,000 German soldiers laid down their arms, more than surrendered at Stalingrad. The capture was achieved not by overwhelming firepower alone, but by command precision. Every American move had been anticipated, coordinated, and amplified through FM networks. U.S. Strategic Analysis Division 1946. In the aftermath, captured German communications officers studied the American radios in disbelief. One report concluded, "Our defeat in the West was not merely by material, it was by organization of sound." Wehrmacht Signal Corps debrief, May 1945. And somewhere in that labyrinth of units and transmissions, the cowboy still rode, his unit pushing east toward the Elbe. The same voice that once called artillery might now have been guiding trucks, escorting refugees, or relaying the surrender of small towns. His horse, perhaps long since replaced by a jeep, remained the same symbol: speed, independence, connection across the void. The German woman he had lifted weeks earlier was almost certainly among those processed in the massive POW camps forming behind the lines. Her name too would vanish into paperwork. But for the soldiers who had witnessed it, her rescue came to symbolize something larger, not just mercy, but mastery, the ability to move faster, to communicate clearer, to reach across divides of language and ideology. The invisible thread that bound man to machine, soldier to soldier, had made acts of humanity possible amid horror. And yet, as April faded into May and Germany's cities crumbled into silence, a deeper question began to haunt commanders. Had this technological unity, this orchestration of steel and signal, changed not only how men fought, but what they fought for? The cowboy's gesture was one man's mercy, but the system that carried him, connected him, sustained him, that was something new, something that would shape armies long after the guns went quiet. The world was about to learn that the future of warfare would not belong to the fastest horse, but to the fastest signal. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Across Germany, silence replaced thunder. The fields that had once shaken under tanks now held only the echo of engines cooling, the clatter of empty canteens, the slow breath of soldiers who had survived. Near the Rhine, where the cowboy had lifted the German woman onto his horse, the air smelled of oil, cordite, and spring rain. A continent lay in ruin, but for the first time in 6 years it was not burning. U.S. Army Field Diary, May 1945. In the days that followed, surrendering soldiers filed past American checkpoints by the tens of thousands. Gaunt faces, mud-caked boots, trembling hands holding identity tags like relics of a lost world. For many, the sight of calm, organized American lines was incomprehensible. German officers, accustomed to rigid hierarchy and chaos under air raids, stared in disbelief at U.S. troops moving with silent coordination, jeeps and trucks directed by unseen voices. "How?" one colonel asked during interrogation. "Did you keep order when we had only madness?" Allied Interrogation Record number 5120, 1945. The answer lay in the invisible latticework that had carried the war to its end: radio, logistics, and trust. It was the unseen trust between operator and commander, between the Signal Corps engineer and the rifleman, between the cowboy and the woman he had chosen not to hate. That web had not only guided shells and convoys, it had guided conscience. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946. In the post-war studies that followed, analysts traced victory to 3 converging streams: industrial might, technical innovation, and moral endurance. America's factories had built not just machines but networks. Each FM frequency, each relay tower, each whisper of code had created a kind of shared intelligence that no other nation could replicate. The German army fought as a machine. The American army fought as an organism. Army Signal Analysis Board Review, 1946. The Ruhr Pocket became the textbook example. During those final weeks, radio reports had turned chaos into rhythm. Ammunition trucks rerouted themselves before roads clogged. Pontoon bridges were assembled hours before orders officially arrived. Reconnaissance aircraft adjusted their patterns in real time. It was a symphony conducted by thousands of anonymous voices, every operator a note in an industrial chorus. Transportation Corps Operational Study, 1946. But such power carried a hidden weight. Commanders feared that war had become too mechanical, too precise, that soldiers might lose sight of the human amid the hum of transmitters. General Omar Bradley wrote later, "The danger of perfect coordination is that it tempts us to forget courage." Bradley Memoirs, 1951. Yet even in perfection, humanity persisted. The Cowboys' Quiet Act became the story that officers told their men when words failed, that mercy had not been erased by mechanism. The image of a soldier lifting a prisoner, rather than striking her, became a myth of moral clarity in a world drowning in technology. In the shadow of Hiroshima and Dachau, it was a reminder that conscience, not circuitry, still defined civilization. Post-war morale evaluation, 1946. By the summer of 1945, as occupation forces took up posts across Germany, the same FM networks that had carried death began carrying life. Engineers rewired transmitters to broadcast relief orders, medical directives, and repatriation schedules. The same hand that tuned frequencies for artillery now sent messages for bread and penicillin. "We turned the war machine into a rescue machine," one Signal Corps technician wrote in his journal. Signal Corps Reconstruction Notes, June 1945. Factories that once built tanks now built tractors. Motorola retooled to produce civilian radios. General Electric turned from bomb timers to turbines. The assembly lines that had forged the nerve system of victory became the arteries of peace. War Production Board Conversion Report, 1946. And yet, the lesson of that network would never fade. During the Korean War 5 years later, FM communication once again gave American units superiority in coordination, even when outnumbered. In Vietnam, those same principles evolved into air-ground integration. By the 1991 Gulf War, the concept had matured into network-centric warfare, a direct descendant of the system born along the Rhine in 1945. Defense Communications Review, 1991. Historians today trace the digital battlefield back not to computers, but to cavalry radios and field switchboards. What began with the Cowboy's Horse and the SCR-300 became the backbone of modern military doctrine. Speed, synchronization, and shared awareness. It was not enough to have more men or better guns. Victory came to those who could connect. Faster, clearer, farther. Joint Chiefs Strategic Study, 2002. But behind that evolution was still the same fragile thread of humanity. For all the power of technology, wars are ended by people, often by single moments of compassion that break through the static. In the ruins of Germany, one such moment had reminded weary men that even in total war, choice remained. Witnesses from that day near Remagen, interviewed decades later, spoke of how it changed them. One mechanic recalled, "It was the first time I saw someone treat an enemy like a person again. It made me think, maybe we were fighting for something more than victory." Veteran Oral History Project, 1984. The German woman's fate is uncertain. Some reports suggest she was processed through a POW camp near Koblenz and later released in 1946. Others claim she never left Germany, her name lost among millions displaced by war. But her memory lived in the words of the men who had seen her lifted into the saddle. Prisoner Repatriation Record, 1946. To them, that single act had symbolized everything the war could have destroyed, and everything it hadn't. The cowboy had not been ordered to do it. No doctrine, no radio command had told him to. It had been instinct. The same instinct that guided him through dust storms in Texas and ambushes in Germany. Somewhere in that gesture lay the final victory. A man who remembered mercy when the world had forgotten. In later years, military ethicists used the story to teach restraint. The U.S. Army War College cited it as the invisible victory, the triumph of values over vengeance. Ethics in Combat Study, 1961. As the decades passed, the cowboy's name faded, absorbed into legend. But the symbol endured. In reenactments, veterans spoke of him as the last cavalryman, bridging two eras, the old world of horses and the new world of circuits. The image became almost cinematic, a lone figure on horseback under a grey sky, holding out his hand to an enemy in need. Oral History Archive, 1975. In the end, that was what the war had revealed, that behind every tank, every plane, every signal, there was still a human heartbeat. The engineers who soldered circuits, the operators who whispered through static, the soldiers who fought and forgave, they had built not just a military machine, but a moral one. As the camera of history pans out, the final image lingers. The River Rhine glinting under a pale sun, convoys rolling eastward, and among them, a cowboy's silhouette fading into the haze, the last echo of an old world, carrying the fragile grace of humanity into the machine age. A field report written weeks later summed it up best. He reminded us that victory without mercy is just survival. U.S. 9th Armored Command Summary, May 1945. In modern war, connection outweighs firepower, and speed defeats armor. But in every age, one truth endures. The greatest strength is not in the signal or the weapon or the machine. It is in the hand that chooses to lift, not strike.